Right. Thank you very much, Rachel. Aloha and welcome to all of you who have joined us here today. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please be aware the panel discussion is being recorded and we will make it available to those that have RSVP'd. We encourage you to share your comments and questions with our panelists. Feel free to type them into the chat box at any time. This is our 4th year, believe it or not, of hosting these panels that bring together thought leaders and visionaries in the fields of art, design, and architecture. Topics in the past have covered cities of the future, resiliency, education, historic future, cultural design, to name a few. This panel here is exciting for not only the topic of water security, but also for the caliber of panelists we have with us today. Let me, very briefly, as I was instructed, introduce all 4. And when I'm done with that, we will have short videos that go a little bit more into depth. Many of you may know Stuart Coleman for his book, Eddie Would Go. He's written 2 more books dedicated to surfing culture and numerous articles on a variety of topics. Stuart was Hawaiian Islands regional manager for the Surfrider Foundation for 11 years. And given his love for the ocean and Hawaii, it is no wonder that he's involved in protecting our waters. Mahina, Paishon Duarte, I'm going to ask everybody to please mute themselves if they're doing something else. Or Rachel, can you please mute in the back? Thank you. Mahia Paishon Duarte is a Renaissance type person, an accomplished educator, a social entrepreneur, business owner, and community change maker. Her newest projects include a nonprofit dedicated to changing the face of philanthropy in Hawaii, and another, Aina Aloha Economic Futures, dedicated to creating a more resilient economy. And we want to give Dr. Stephanie Dunbar-Coe heartfelt thanks for squeezing us in today. Just found out her board met this morning and finished right before this session here. Thank you. She has a long and impressive history studying and working to protect native species and ecosystems. One of her top skills is collaboration, the ability to work with the community, cultural and subsistence practitioners, landowners, businesses, and nonprofit organizations. And last but not least, artists give us perspectives on life that words don't quite deliver, sorry. And we're happy that Diane Wennick is on this panel. She's a bit under the weather, and we are very appreciative that she is able to participate. Diane's background is a mix of business, technology, and art, which gives her a unique way to approach issues. So now we have created a short introductory video for each one of our panelists that Rachel, if we're ready, can get started.
Y is really unique. It stands for Wastewater Alternatives and Innovations, and we're dedicated to protecting water quality throughout the state by reducing sewage pollution. And we do this through helping the state, counties, and individual homeowners with upgrading cesspools. Again, we have the most cesspools in the country per capita. We have 88,000 in a discharge about 53 million gallons per day of raw sewage into the ground, which goes up into our groundwater through streams and into our nearshore waters. And it also threatens drinking water. And so, this was something that I just, as a surfer, as a swimmer, I knew I had to do something about this, because this is what makes Hawaii so spectacular. Right now, Hawaii is a little bit, we have to be frank, in last place when it comes to cesspools. We have the most per capita in the country, but we're on the periphery and just on the edge of doing something really exciting. And with these innovative new technologies and the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is the biggest of its kind in history with over $1 trillion, we can honestly make Hawaii one of the leaders in the country and in the world with innovative new technologies to treat wastewater, where you can recycle up to 100% of the solids and the liquids, and really get like water back into the land through irrigation, and the solids can be transformed into biochar, which is a soil amendment, and it helps reduce climate change. It's a carbon sink. So there are a lot of things really to be excited about, and we're right on the edge of, I think, big breakthroughs.
So really, Bye Collective is a social enterprise, and we exist to help to bring together culture, community, and commerce to really tackle some of the important issues that we as people who love our homeland, our beautiful place, Hawaii. And we're experimenting with new ways to problem solve, to tackle seemingly invisible systemic forces that are working to maintain status quo equilibrium. And we want to do this in ways that are collaborative, inventive, and inclusive. If you call Hawaii your beloved homeland, then kuapa fish ponds, non-instrumental open ocean navigation, and agroecology methodology should come to mind when you talk about the indigenous ingenuity of this place. I'm a lifelong student of Hawaiian fish ponds and voyaging practices, and I actively and vigorously apply these integrated interdisciplinary design principles into every context I'm a part of. And so when you ask me, what is my passion, what are my interests, it's simply this, it's the health and vitality of our aina, as well as our people. So we'll just leave you with this particular principle that I apply in my thinking and in my work. Aina aloha. We are of and from this aina that ultimately sustains us. We employ strategies for economic development that place our kuleana to steward precious, limited resources in a manner that ensures our long-term horizon as a viable island, people, and place.
Nature Conservancy, we conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And in Hawaii and Palmyra, that means we protect native forests, our source of fresh water, and collaborate with partners to restore coral reefs and fish along our coastlines. At Palmyra, we study resilience to learn how healthy systems respond to climate change so that we can make improvements elsewhere to build resilience. I have been lucky enough to spend a lifetime outdoors in Hawaii, hiking and fishing and camping and living and learning. And caring for Hawaii's native natural communities is the single greatest thing that I can do as a scientist, a landowner, a Hawaiian, and a mother. And this has given me tremendous passion for my work. I was born on Kauai and raised on the east end of Molokai, where my family has had the privilege and responsibility of owning land for many generations. And this kuleana took my early love of Hawaii's flora to something more, to tangible actions that can make these islands that we all love so dearly sustainable and viable and thriving in the face of climate change and biodiversity loss for future generations. Restoring forests and carbon and biodiversity that are no longer there provides significant ecological, cultural, and economic values in our island community that's on the forefront of climate impact, in a globally recognized hotspot of conservation, and with a cultural heritage focused on sustainability. This is Hawaii's collective magic, and it's super exciting to be a part of it.
I am one of the producers and directors of Finite Water, a film about the global water situation. It's my first film, and it started off from pretty much from being an artist. After attending the Global Water Summit in Paris, it was very important for me to try to figure out how to learn how to make a film, because I learned so much, and I felt that it was something that had to be shared with as many people as possible around the world. The response has been really, really wonderful, because many people can understand the film without understanding the technological part of the water conservation or water management. And it just brings awareness in a way where anybody could understand, even including children. The entire voyage started from my original career, which was in the computer technology field and also real estate. And from there, I decided that it was really important to also balance my life with the art world. What creates passion for me is the ability to think outside the box. And that is very much part of what I've learned when I attended a session with UNESCO. So you allow yourself to think outside the box, and you allow yourself to go past your comfort zone. And even though there are many changes happening at the same time, it creates a passion, because all of a sudden you don't have to feel like you have to be a certain way in order to live your life. I think we're all a work in progress. We all have something that may change, and those changes are good, they may be bad, but it leads us towards a path where we can really find our true selves, and it's okay to do that. Even if it may be uncomfortable for a while, we learn to adapt.
Again, a warm welcome to all of you. So without further ado, let's get the conversation started. I'm going to start with a couple of general questions. Each one of those is for all of you. So first one, you're all involved in water in some ways, from wastewater to documentary filmmaking. What drew you to become involved in water security? Nobody speaks up. I'm going to pick on somebody. Stuart, would you mind starting?
Sure. As surfers, we're a little bit guinea pigs in the water for water quality. And I remember surfing in Malibu when I was living in California, and it's kind of a dream to be there. And I would have these fun surf sessions and then start feeling really sick thereafter, and learn that there are all these $1 million homes on the beach were on cesspools, and their waste was going right into the water. And so that was the beginning of Surf Rider. They started Malibu, and water quality was one of the top issues. And so I got connected with them and started realizing, water underlies everything. And it's the one thing besides air that we cannot survive without. And so I started getting involved with a lot of water quality issues, and then realized that Hawaii had the highest number of cesspools in the country and per capita, and that just blew me away. And so then I kind of started focusing on the wastewater inputs and the nutrient pollution that was going into nearshore waters. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I'll jump
Stephanie?
in.
Okay. Go ahead. No, Mahina.
Yeah,
fine.
I'll jump. Sure. I think for me, I really started to pay attention to my relationship with Bai, with water. When I went on my first long voyage, one of my cultural practices that I cherish is as a wayfinder, an open ocean voyager. And so my first long voyage from Hawaii to Majuro,
was life-changing. One of the reasons why it was life-changing is because we were only allotted 1 liter of water per day for all of your needs, right? And for me, I really started to, we were on ocean for 21 days. And just the experience of experiencing, in some ways, scarcity, right? Experiencing what it felt like to have just a limited resource and to be mindful of every single sip that you take, right? Being mindful of every single sip that you take. Being thankful that the meal that you eat it all, because you're also, not only getting all the nutrients, but it also helps to quench your thirst. And this idea that, if things were to go awry, that we really only have a limited amount of water available to us. So I really started to regard water and food as a sacred resource from that point on.
1 liter of water a day, that is not very much at all. Wow. Stephanie, want to go next?
Sure, and I can echo a little of that sentiment. What drew me is that there is this absolute reciprocity between our health and the health of our Aina. And it speaks to what both Stuart and Mahina have just shared. And that reciprocity is foundational in Hawaiian culture. And what's drawn me to water security issues is the clarity of that reciprocity between the health of Hawaii's native watershed forests and the availability and quality of fresh water, all in the most isolated landmass on the planet.
Great, thank you. Diane, you're muted.
For me, I kind of stumbled upon the subject because I was in the midst of learning French and I was in Paris, and I just got my degree from UH in French and recently, and I had a passion for learning the language, but I chose to volunteer in Paris and try to speak the language. And one conference was about the futures, Paris Future Talks, but the other one was about water. And I attended the Global Water Summit, hoping to volunteer. They ended up just asking me to become an academic student during the conference, and I didn't know a thing. So I am the normal, average person, a regular, everyday person. I walked into a meeting with hundreds of people from around the world and tables by country, and each country spoke about their water shortages. And I was aghast. And I just said, oh my God, it's worse than I ever thought or could imagine. And I thought about Hawaii, and I thought about our community and how do we survive if the rest of the world is going through this. And so I had to learn how to make a film to try to share what I had learned. And that took a while to learn as well. So now the documentary is worldwide, and it's reached many countries, but it started off here in Hawaii, doing the hula, talking about our beautiful island, and how precious water is here for us as well. But it had a message that came from many of us who had a concern about water, but without any kind of knowledge, I guess, or experience in the field. And I think that's what attracted people to the movie, was because anybody could understand what we were trying to convey. So that's how it all happened. And then it seems that it has now segued into a second film, and I am continuing the path very similar to what Stuart is doing, talking about how agriculture affects, or agriculture of the soil affects water, or water quality. So.
What an incredible story.
It's crazy.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
So how do you think life here in our islands will change with the impact of climate change, specifically as it relates to water? So bringing it home a little bit. Anybody want to go first? Go, Stephanie.
Sure. I think, as we all know, the stakes are really high, and the need to protect land and water is, greater now than ever. We're seeing higher temperatures and sustained drought and more frequent and destructive wildfire, sea level rise, which threatens many things, including putting pressure on the freshwater layer under our islands, threatening to turn it brackish. All of these things adversely impact water security. But I'm hopeful, and I think many of us on this call are hopeful. We have time to act. If we do it now, we have the tools and the knowledge, and it's about kako and finding the will. I think we've all talked about Hawaii is a gift. It's a gift to all of us who call it home, and it's a gift to the world. And we can and should lead on climate change.
Absolutely. I want to piggyback on that. I want to share a quote that one of my friends passed on to me. It's pretty striking. This actually comes from Pope Francis. I'll read it out to you folks. The gravest effects of the climate crisis are always suffered by the poorest people. There is now around the world an increasing emphasis on climate justice, which means when we deal with the climate crisis, we all must be sensitive to the fact that the poorest of people are the ones who almost always suffer the most harm. So I guess, to your question, bringing it home, here's the thing. What I didn't hear in that, very poignant quote was this. For a Hawaiian person, I regard the clouds, I regard the water, I regard our oceans as ancestors, as a part of family. And so for me, when we talk about the climate crisis, when we talk about water security, it's within the context of what it would feel like to lose family members, right? And here's the thing too, like, we all know this, whether you're Kanaka or you're Kama'aina or you're a newcomer, we are all taken by the beauty, the immense beauty of our homeland. And we're so fortunate. But can you imagine not being able to enjoy, running streams in Hawaii? Can you imagine not being able to enjoy, Waikiki as we know it, or some of our other favorite ocean areas? I just spent some time in Ka'ava on Oahu. It's all of that shoreline is being eroded away. We have really special connections and memories to these places, and we have kuleana. So what would it mean to live in a Hawaii where we're somewhat disconnected to our memories, to our genealogies, to our stories of place, to our kuleana, and to this sense of connectedness to one another? Hawaii is not only a place, it's not only a homeland. For me, it's Hawaii's family members, ancestor.
I'll jump in building on that. I think in the West, we have this perspective of like the environment is outside of us. Mahina, and I've talked about this, like there wasn't a word for the environment in Hawaiian language and in many indigenous cultures because it's not outside of you, it is a part of you. It's completely integrated and essential for our survival. But in the West, we've really grown this detachment and we see it as commodities. And, it's in the face of climate change now, I think we really have to rethink that whole relationship with nature, because, you know, as Pope Francis said, you know, this is, in the Bible, it was said, you shall have dominion over, and excuse me, I'm a preacher's kid, so it comes naturally to me. My father was a civil rights leader and very into nature, so I got a very progressive view of religion, thank God. But, you know, many people interpret that as domination, and that is not what it is. You know, that is, it's living in peace and caring for and taking care of, stewarding our environment. And I think we will either learn that lesson, or that lesson will school us in a very serious way. And, you know, we have 10 years to really change the way we look at nature and treat each other. And so I like to say, you know, in the triple bottom line theory, and looking at, you know, economy, environment, and people, redefining that and saying we need a new declaration of interdependence, you know, that to realize how completely dependent on nature we are. Yeah.
Thank you for saying 10 years, because I keep on saying, no, it's down to 8 years. Yeah. Well, we're running out of time. Diane, anything you want to add to that? Should we jump to the next question? You were still muted.
Yeah, because yeah, I agree. There's a time frame. At the same time, I think while I was there at the summit, to hear each country speak on behalf of their citizens and say they have several million people that need water and they don't have it, and how do they make it? How do they produce it? A lot of them, unfortunately, you know, have to choose desalination, which is probably something we may have to do in the future. And there's a lot of problems with that, I know, you know, and it's unfortunate, but, you know, there are places also that are trying to invent certain ways which aren't really as efficient. I don't even want to say the word efficient, because there's a lot of downsides to desalination, but there are scientists out there trying to find ways to produce water, whether it be condensation, which is kind of, you know, not as efficient. But what I learned from all that was that people came together. Each country had a problem, and the people around the table were from different countries, including the United States. And they sat there and tried to problem solve not only the financial part, but also technological and wastewater management, etc. And so I walked away and I felt a little relieved, because I felt that we were going to eventually get there one day also, because you could see the map of California. It's pretty much in a drought situation, and well, pretty much half of the United States as well. So I think what I gained from that was that there are problems, but there were solutions. And I think that it made me feel a little more relief that people that had water issues already were able to achieve some type of success to produce water. Now, I'm not sure exactly what everybody's opinion is about desalination in Hawaii, but I'm sure that there are pros and cons. I just feel that sometimes we kind of also have to figure out the best way to be prepared, I think. And so it was, for me, a real educational conference, because you were able to see how other countries were able to resolve their issues. And they were very civilized about it. Even if people have no water, they were able to figure out a way without having panic, like what happened in Cape Town. So.
Thank you. So each one of you had a message of hope. Each one of you said in some ways there are tools and there are solutions. So let me drill into that a little bit. What are some of the strongest, most effectual measures being taken to protect our water security from your point of view? Okay, Stuart, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, thank you for that, Bettina. Right now, we've always kind of looked at wastewater as something, for the last century and a half, of something we flush and forget, and it's not something polite we talk about in polite society. And yet, it's one of the largest sources of waste, and it's like food, water, and waste and energy. There's big sectors of society that we need to talk about more. So we're working on technology that's basically a century and a half old. And we have technology that's coming. I was fortunate enough to go to the Gates Foundation's Reinvented Toilet Expo in Beijing, which, like Diane, when you find yourself at one of these conferences, you're like, how did I get here? This is interesting, bizarre thing. But it was like a glimpse into the future, because like ancient cultures and indigenous cultures around the world, they reused much of their waste. And so we have the capacity to recycle 100% of our waste. And we're working with companies, technological partners that we're bringing to Hawaii that can do that. And so you can turn all the wastewater into almost drinking water, but R1, R2 water that can be used for irrigation, to replenish the aquifer, which is desperately needed because we have its, dwindling water resources. And then you can take the solids and through pyrolysis, turn them into biochar, which is a soil amendment and a carbon sink. And Hawaii is at the forefront of this. If we can find the will to do these, and with the Infrastructure Act, I think we can, their availability for funding, we could become a leader in the world in showing how, like the Native Hawaiians who lived here, for more than 500 to 800 years without outside contact and had to be sustainable, we can show that we can be much more sustainable and a model for the rest of the world. So I'm excited about that, because we made healthcare, we were national leaders in healthcare at one point, and we can lead in sustainability as well.
Absolutely. I am curious, that technology, is that being used in other places around the world yet?
It is in different places, but it is very new. And so they haven't been used together so much. And so we have the opportunity to bring these two tech partners together to become like the first 100% recycling of all liquids and solids. Yeah.
Awesome.
Because we need the nutrients on the land, but right now we're pumping them out into the ocean. We're spending hundreds of millions of dollars for these municipal plants just to waste that water, pump it all across the island and pump it out to sea. And that's just, an outmoded model that we can't afford to do anymore.
Got a question from the audience here that person says, I heard that Los Angeles County is in the process of treating their wastewater into drinking water because of their drought situation. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there are places around the country that are starting this process. Singapore was one of the first countries. They became a leader, and they had the prime minister drinking them, right out of the recycled water, kind of showing that it was safe. And Bill Gates did the same thing, but I learned later that from people who worked under him, he's like, don't you think that we had to drink that water before he did and see what happened? But I think it is something that is progressive cities around the world are starting to do this. Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Exciting. Stephanie, you're unmuted.
Sure. I love what Stuart shared around water quality and the importance of that. And I'm going to take us to source water. Punavai headwater, or Po'ovai rather. But saving, protecting, and preserving our native forests equals fresh water for our islands. These forests are the source of water security for us. In, you know, their ability to capture and absorb fresh water that recharges our aquifers. Even for people on catchment, the forest cover is what enables extensive rainfall. You notice that barren islands like Koho'olawe, they don't rain. The forests are also able to capture mist and fog drip from clouds. So it's not just rainfall, and that adds even more water to our aquifers. And we know that science, we know in a number of different knowledge systems, but Hawaii's forests are multi-layered. They're not just a single canopy or a lower layer. They're quite complex. And what that does is it mitigates the force of rainfall. So allowing a raindrop, if you will, to drip and drop through those various forest layers and therefore be absorbed more slowly and more completely, rather than slamming into bare ground or falling from great heights, say like in a monotypic eucalyptus forest. Hawaii has about 1.6 million acres that are covered in native forest. And that's about a quarter of our total land area. And almost 1 million of those acres are not protected. About 260,000 of those acres are privately owned, and 140,000 acres of those 260,000 acres are zoned agriculture. And so they can be damaged, they can be developed. Our kuleana to protect these places is our best impact to save our water.
Hey, Steph, can I ask you a question? Is it okay if I just jump in there? And just
Absolutely. I love this. Please.
Awesome. So can you walk me through, help me understand, how long does it take for, I don't know, like an acre of forest or 100 acres of forest, native forest to recover, you know? So the idea of like, you know, we as humans will impact our native ecosystems. How long would it take for a forest system to recover? Yeah. I know there's a lot of variables, but in general.
There are, but we'll keep it simple. Every time I go out in the forest, I learn, every single time. And I have been struck time and time again with how resilient our ecosystems are. You know, it is a pet peeve of mine, if I may, that Hawaiian ecosystems and species are considered weak, that they succumb. And they are absolutely not. They are just highly connected and evolved to this area, to their place. And so I'll give you a tangible example. On Molokai, at the base of Ka'apahu in Kamalo, there, the Nature Conservancy has been doing a passive restoration project. And so, sorry for the jargon, but instead of actively planting trees in the ground, we protect the area and let it recover on its own by taking away the threats. And so in that area, those threats are largely feral ungulates, deer and goats and pigs, and weeds. And this is a pretty big area. And it is so heartening and surprising, to be honest, how quickly that area is recovered. Within a 10-year period, we have Ohia and Olapa and A'ali'i, all of these foundational forest species, pioneers, if you will, that are hip high. So It's going to depend on where you are. It's going to depend on your seed layer. It's going to depend on if these areas are able to grow from an already established native edge. But it's all possible, and it can be quite quick. But we need to protect it. We need to give them a chance.
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. And thank you for the follow-up question, Mahina. Do you want to talk about tools or measures that, from your angle, might protect our water security?
Sure, I do. There's actually a project I'm a part of, and I'll ask Rachel just in a little bit to bring that up. I guess one of the things, though, that I do want to comment on is we can hold hope, future vision, aspiration, but I don't think we do enough of like collective reflection around the root causes of why we've gotten into this place in the first place. And the reason why I bring that up is, you know, when I think of who are the water experts out there, one person that comes to mind is Kapua Sproat, right? Long time water advocate, Earth Justice attorney, faculty member with Richardson Law School. And it's basically this, like, you know, we had the Waiahole situation in the 90s. We had Navai Eha just recently. Now we're in Kapukaki with Red Hill. And for me, like, I want to better understand I am not an expert in water management. I've been a part of management of particular areas. However, I'm interested in like what about the policies, or what about the economy, or what about the human interaction of this part of the equation is not working? Something is broken. And I think it's too easy for us to say, oh, we're going to apply a technical solution or intervention, and we're gonna really believe and hope that it's gonna equate to the outcomes that we're seeking, the transformative outcomes that we're seeking. I think too often than not, that is not the case. Because like Steph had mentioned, you know, our native ecosystems are so beautifully complex, and so are our human systems. So now I will ask Rachel to bring up slide number 2. So I just wanted to share real quick around a project that I'm involved with as a Aina Aloha Economic Futures volunteer and contributor. Couple years ago, 2 years ago, you know, in my role as a volunteer with Aina Aloha Economic Futures, which is a loosely formed coalition at this point, we were invited by our friends, Celeste Connor folks, and you know, they've long been at work with the integration of culture, community, commerce, and so forth through all of her work at Hawaii Green Growth, as well as the Aloha Plus dashboard and metrics that they're putting together. And so she invited myself and my colleague to kind of think through how we might blend the values and principles that Hawaii Green Growth and all of their partners were developing, and some of the values and metrics that we were trying to apply and think through as a larger community through Aina Aloha economic work. And so why does this matter? So we're wanting to, we're creating a tool for a broad array of stakeholders to apply and test to see how it might result in a different set of outcomes. It's really a tool it's a process tool to help us think about the values and the perspectives for which we make planning and engineering decisions. And so we're going to test this tool. Next slide, please. We're going to test this Malama implementation tool on the Alawai watershed project, right? And why is this important? Well, we know that the Alawai watershed is very important. And, you know, after that, the impact of the 100-year storm It brought, damage to many properties. I think it was up to, just over $300 million in structural damage from that 100-year storm. And so, folks within that particular basin, the Makiki, Waikiki, Manoa Basin are very motivated to kind of think through how they might redesign and re-engineer the Alawai, right? So we got together. I'm just going to quickly talk through it. You can't really see all of the points, but I will tell you this. Together with the Hawaii Local 2030 Hub, a consulting firm, Stantec, and ourselves, Aina Aloha Economic Futures, we worked on this comprehensive tool to really just assist partners, both inside and outside the Hawaii Green Growth Network, to think about how they might conceptualize their projects and measure their progress towards blended outcomes, the kind of blended outcomes that we're all talking about, right? Whether you call it triple bottom line, SDG, ESGs, or people, profit, planet, however you want to frame that. So we basically wanted to create a tool that will help us measure our progress towards more blended outcomes that are grounded in Hawaii place-based values. We central to this, and why we've coined it the Malama implementation tool, is because it will help a planner. You go ahead and go through different dimensions, and you will self-assess your activities and your strategies, and it'll basically compute a score and help you determine whether your actions, your decisions, your strategies or tactics are going to help you move towards an initiative that is, or development project that is good for Aina, is working towards healthy Aina, healthy communities, or if it's moving you more towards the other end of the spectrum, which is bad for Aina. So we're ready to go live with this. Actually, you're the very first public audience that is previewing this assessment with us. And we're just excited to try something and to really kind of operationalize our aspirations and our values into something that's real and concrete. And this is something new to us, and we need to just iterate along the way and be open to learning. And for us, that is what is important, right? That we stay flexible and that we learn along the way, and communicate how these tools might be in service to healthy Aina, healthy communities, or if they're not in service and they're not helpful.
Awesome. Thank you for premiering this with us today. This is pretty cool. We're staying tuned, and we'll watch and contribute if we can.
May I ask Mahina a follow-up question? Mahina, what's been sort of your feedback response from partners, industry? I know this is a demonstration, so much more will be learned, but curious what that initial feedback's been, largely from industry.
Yeah, I think, well, mostly industry, they're really excited to see that there might be something available for them to use. So we're actually getting a lot of excitement. We've been getting, just inquiries from folks in the energy sector, folks in the agriculture sector. So there's a lot of interest. I think at the same time, there is light conversation around, well, how is this going to affect the bottom line? How is this going to affect profitability? How is this going to affect the scope of the project, and therefore the budget of the project? And so, we have architects and planners and designers and so forth, probably on this call. So it's probably something that they think of very often. And that's something real. And I think that's something that we're gonna have to think through carefully. Like, how do we manage costs, immediate costs, And how do we think through the trade-offs? And how do we measure the long-term generational impact, positive impact that we might be able to produce? We might not see the immediate returns, and that's the problem. That's the current mindset, is we want to see return on investment within 5 years. If not, then it's not going to pencil out, and the project won't go oftentimes. So I don't know. This is again the complex nature, but we're trying to put forth a tool that can actually start to measure, help folks to like look at these things a little bit more critically, instead of just immediately discounting the cost. Let's also account for all of the possible cost savings down the line, and all the other positive economic impacts that might be generated if we invest now. Great follow-up question, Steph. Thank you. I do want to give Diane the opportunity to be the cleanup hitter on this question about tools, and on this one. So go on with it, Diane. All yours.
When you say tools, you mean like different ways of producing water, or is that what you mean?
From your perspective, what are some of the stronger, more effective measures or tools being taken to protect our waters? Sorry.
Yeah, well, actually, I would like to share something that is going to be in the next film that probably would shed some light on that I'm still learning about myself. Sorry, this my throat is a little bit sore still.
You are a rock star for being here, Diane. I am. This is amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, live COVID. Hello. Hello, everybody. It's survivable. Thank God. But one thing I learned, which was quite interesting at UNESCO, was exactly what Mahina was talking about. They have developed a futures literacy program, and what they are teaching the world, not only politicians, but organizations all over the world, and it's becoming more and more accepted, I guess, is to think out of the box, and in a sense where you gauge whether or not something works. He takes this theory of murmuration. It's as if you were watching a flock of birds and you see how one takes off and the next takes off, and the next takes off, and all these birds continue to fly with that bird. And he says, because at some point there is no hierarchy. There's a horizontal way of thinking that has actually stemmed, and that is actually what creates the internet, because everybody can be their own boss and not have to go to somebody to get approval, etc. And so this theory of futures literacy, they gather these think tanks and they just shoot a lot of ideas about what could possibly change things. And I came across an amazing example, which I'm in the process of filming now. And what had happened is in France, they were having a toxicity level. Of course, they do the same thing as everywhere else, where they gauge, they monitor it, especially like Hawaii. And it started to become more and more obvious that there was a level of toxicity that was not acceptable. And the engineers got together and said, okay, we could definitely just create a filtration system, and we could, the cost of the filtration system is X and this amount of time and so many people. But they came up with an amazing idea to find out where the toxicity came from. In their sense, in their example, it actually came from the agriculture, the farmers that were producing, producing whatever along the Seine and the different rivers. And so in a matter of 20, 30 years, they decided to re-educate a whole entire industry. And they brought in all of these experts to re-educate the farming industry in France in order to minimize the toxicity level. So rather than take their engineering hat and say, okay, I have the expertise of X, they decided to just completely change the entire thinking of an industry. And that, for example, one problem was they had to go organic. And in order to go organic, it costs more. And in order for them to be able to survive, they didn't know how to produce where they could actually afford to be a farmer. So they had to educate them on that, educate them on the produce to make, educate them on the toxicity levels. And it is now, they told me just recently, I think it was, they're up to 10% higher than they were before, because more farmers are coming on board with the program. And it has proven to be successful. But it did take something like what Mahina's approach was, which is where, you know, you want to see if something actually can succeed. And in that sense, they realized it would take time and money, but it was money well spent, because they didn't have to go out and technologically change something. They actually worked together. So I thought that was really, you know, a great experience to learn that.
I think we're all anxiously awaiting your next documentary. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
We are at 4:30, and we are nowhere close to what I had hoped to ask everybody, and I am not about to interrupt this conversation here. So I will take this off script and start asking some of the questions that are coming in here. One of them, I think everybody saw, which I thought was fascinating, is from Sam. How can densely urbanized neighborhoods help to recapture stormwater and other wastewater? Is there a way to bring indigenous technologies, for example, loko'ia, which I think are Hawaiian fish ponds, into build up paved over neighborhoods? As an architect, I love that question. Thank you, Sam. Who would like to run with this one?
Mahina, you're muted, but I think you'd be the best person since you.
You go first, Stuart, and I'll follow up.
Oh no, I defer to you. You're the expert.
You know, it all depends, right? Our habitat, our native systems they're complex. They're very place specific. So we'd have to definitely take a look at each ahupua'a, right? But here are a couple of things that come to mind. Is that I think we need to, we need to think about how we plan. So I'm very much in support of concentrating urban sprawl, or limiting urban sprawl into condensed areas, in planned areas. I think that's important. I think too, I've been following some nonprofit groups like in Kaimuki, Trihu, and different folks who are really trying to encourage, planting of fruit trees or any other trees. And I'm just going to take it back to on a really personal level. You remember, for those who were, who've been here at least a decade, maybe two, it felt like you take a walk, so many of our neighborhoods are filled with fruit trees, right? Mango, avocado, lychee, whatever. And it was so fun to be able, when it was fruit time to harvest, that we could exchange in that. And more, what I'm seeing, I was, my family house is in Pu'unui, Lower Nu'uanu, and I'm just seeing more build out and more people who are, and we're in this, we $1 million for a home on Oahu. That's ludicrous, right? For the median median priced home. That's crazy. So what are we forced to do as working citizens? We need to subdivide. We are trying to create places so our, our kids, we can take care of our parents, our cousins, our aunties, and we're trying to cram in our family spaces. But consequently, more and more, I see that we're like cutting down our trees, our fruit trees. And what does that do when we, when we reduce the amount of green space? There's a lot of not only environmental effects, but there's effects to our health, our public health, to the community and family fabric, right? So it's just like, this is again, I don't think there's any easy solution. Maybe my friends here on panel have like a simple solution that they can provide. However, here's one thing that I think we can do better. I think, I'm a neighbor island person. I'm calling in from Pololo Kona. I really appreciate that Oahu, you folks have a neighborhood board. I think, being here in Kona, there's we have more and more development that's taking place. And I think we need more participatory governance models. And I think we need to think about how do we come together in our ahupua'a, in our moku, and come together and make decisions. Like, why do we need to wait for a big development for us to come together? And by that time, it's already too late. It's way too late. Like, why can't we come together as a community and lay out, well, here are our top priorities as a community. And why can't we come together around what we share in common, and then invite developers, invite private public partnership to help advance the priorities that are good for community, good for Aina, and good for economy.
Yeah, we have, the legislative session just started yesterday, and we used to host, and we'll probably be doing so again, a kind of tutorial session called Civics is Sexy. And we would just, teach people about how to get involved and how to submit testimony, how to track bills. And Hawaii is kind of a leader in that we have one of the best online systems, and we kind of pioneered it in the country. www.capital.hawaii.gov. And, we started with 50 people at the first one. It went to 100, then 150, and we had 250 at the last one. And many of these people stuck around and passed bills, people who had never been involved and engaged with politics before. So I really encourage people to get involved. There are tutorials on that website. Our country is so divided right now, and yet polls show we're so united on many issues. And it's just pundits and politicians and, kind of corporations that are, some of them feeding this division, when really we have so much more in common than we do apart. And so, yeah, I think that's something we need to emphasize, and water should be at the top of the list of things that we have to prioritize and protect.
Hey, Stuart, can I just react to what you just said? Sorry, I'm just trying to have fun with you guys. So as you say that, like, I definitely think whether it's the Nature Conservancy, it's VI, it's the Sierra Club, or whomever, like I really think that there needs to be more public information around the state water code, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it is a public trust that we should all care for, a public trust resource that water is a public trust resource that we should all care for, then we need to arm ourselves, equip ourselves with the knowledge and information so that we can all actively participate, right? And we as residents, whether we're scientists or whatever that we do, I think having that base core knowledge is going to be really important. As folks participate in, whether it's their association meetings or their neighborhood board meetings or whatever that they're participating in, I think it would be really important. I think it's something that can be free, right? All we need to do is give of our time.
Yeah, Totally.
I really
Great.
like what both of you said around that civic engagement. So if I can riff on that for a sec, I think many of us know that Hawaii spends less than 1% of our state budget on protecting our aina. So as a state, we essentially take for granted all of these many benefits nature provides, water being just one of them, right? But we pay no bill to capture and filter rainwater. We pay no bill for natural erosion control and clean nearshore waters. We don't pay a bill for the uptake of carbon dioxide and so the supply of oxygen. No bill for the value of the Hawaiian culture that's totally inherently tied to the protection of these natural resources where those traditions evolve. So if we, take a moment and contemplate the cost of replicating just one of those essential services through, amazing technology, which again, it's going to take everything. So I'm not at all turning down those opportunities around technology and engineering, but if we contemplate the cost of what that would be, we begin to appreciate the contributions that these natural resources make to us and to our economy and to our quality of life. So back to the civics is sexy thing, which Stuart, I think is fantastic and want that to be a high school course. I wish I had taken that in high school. I think one of the ways that we can all help protect our water and our natural places is to ask your representative, ask your senator, ask your county council member to increase the investment that we make in protecting our aina. And that's kind of no kidding, but that can be hard to do. And it can be so effective. I'm optimistic with the opening of the legislative session yesterday, that this message is starting to be heard with greater urgency.
This is the perfect lead in to a question that in another format I would have asked too. It came through the chat and it is touching on the situation at Red Hill. So in the wake of Red Hill, would you agree that it's vital to identify what other entities or third parties can potentially impact our water system? In other words, is there potential for another leak somewhere else? That's $1 million question, and I think there's no panel better to wrestle with it than this one here. Who'd like to go? I mean, it's hard to, it's impossible to answer it. But I think what it boils down to, what it comes to, is how well protected are our water resources? How secure are they?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think there have been warnings and there have been plenty of leaks before. This is just the one that got the most attention and one of the largest ones at Red Hill. But environmentalists have been, and the Sierra Club has taken the lead on this for many, many years. And the warnings are out there, and they've been out there for a long time. And so we have not done a good job of taking care of our resources at all. And so what I was mentioning before, that these issues have been politicized and divvied up into partisan camps, and these are environmental groups that care about this, they don't care about business. You cannot separate it. You cannot do business if your water eventually becomes completely contaminated. And so I think what we need to do is remind people that these are moral issues. They're not political issues at all. They're moral issues, and they're existential issues about our survival. There have been the rise and fall of many civilizations throughout time, and we see the monuments in the desert of great civilizations that once thrived and ruled half the world, and then vanished. because they didn't take care of their resources. And so we have to be much wiser, because these things will continue to happen again. And the idea of putting that much fuel underground, just reminds us of our dependence on fossil fuels. And I remember, hearing people in the military, one of the most moving arguments I heard was from a Colonel Rice, who was in Time magazine as the greenest military leader in the country, was at the Kaneohe Marine Corps base. And he said, basically, these are national security issues. Our dependence on fossil fuels just makes us weak around the world and vulnerable. And so he and many others have been some of the biggest advocates of, we have to move off this, because it makes us way too vulnerable. And it just, for the moral reasons of, contaminating our INA and our environment. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
I went to one of the meetings there, and when they were speaking about it, and again, I was just kind of listening in and not having very much knowledge. So I didn't think I had the experience to really understand the concept. But there was one thing I did see with my own eyes, and it was a water company in Paris. And they had this very large, that was one of the things, I guess, they invited us to go and see how they actually produce, manage the water. And they had this huge screen, and the screen was divided by pipes of pipes, I guess the pipes, coming from whichever way. And they said they had, and I don't think it's possible right away, but they had the ability to shut off particular routes if there was any threat, whether it be toxicity or terrorism. They said that they had the ability to shut off that route. And so I've read that, what's come out of this is people have gotten sick from it. And, at that point, it wasn't even questionable. It was evident that something had happened. But I was thinking to myself, I wonder if we have that capability here where you're able to monitor the toxicity level at an instant and at a certain location and so on, and how, where is it flowing to? That was one question I had recently myself, because maybe they can't move something, but at least we can monitor it without somebody actually experiencing getting sick. So that's what I was wondering.
No, good observation. Stephanie, anything from your perspective?
What I can say, and this goes back to actually new science coming off of Hawaii Island, from Kohala Mountain and Hualalai Mountain, where there is strong data suggesting that the water we're drinking today is over thousands of years old. So I think many of us have maybe heard 25 years or something around that number. And it's much, much older. So, in other words, it takes 1,000 years for water falling on Kohala Mountain to reach the coast. And it takes over 3,000 years for water falling on Hualalai to reach the coast. On Oahu, that number is believed to be in the hundreds of years, so still quite old. And what that tells us is that our water is ancient. It's ancestral. And pollutants that are put in it today don't just impact current generations, right? But they impact how many generations to come. And so I do believe at a very basic fundamental level, the key message that everyone in Hawaii is we need to value and care for our water and its source, our native forests, and treat it like our kupuna.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That brings, you know, when for those who enjoy a fine wine or a fine Scotch whiskey, puts into perspective, right? We have like vintage water, but in all seriousness, it's so true. It's so true. You know, it's just striking that we're at year 2. We're year 2 in this pandemic, 2+ years. And you know, given the first shutdown, I think we were all shocked. And early on, we're all calling, we need Hawaii 2.0. We need a new normal. We need to you know, we need transformation. And yet I'm feeling as if the powers that the powers that be, the forces that be, are working really hard, really hard to keep the status quo. And what I mean by status quo is that keep that economic engine churning and running at the expense of environmental health, at the expense of aina, at the expense of public health, at the expense of Kama'aina and Kanaka having to leave their homeland. I'm like very impacted emotionally. I feel emotionally impacted by the fact that we have this out migration crisis. It's not okay. It's not okay that we are exporting our knowledge, or we are exporting people and importing, you know, knowledge and expertise from everywhere else. But where is that taking us? Where's that taking us? We have these, you know, the Red Hill crisis is like, come on, let's wake up. Yeah, whether it be 10 years or 8 years to kind of to solve this crisis is, yeah, it's right here. It's in our face. So, you know, what do? I think you're right. You're spot on. I 100% wholeheartedly agree with you, Steph, that I really do believe that it goes back to values. What are the common values that we agree to believe in and to apply in all of our spaces? You know, Steph, and I would say one more thing. Sorry. I would say one more thing. I would say one more thing is that we need to call for accountable leadership, visible, accountable leadership at the government level, at the private level, and in the, you know, in all the community levels as well. I think it's super important. You know, I think it needs to be more transparent. I think that's the only way that we're going to break through the status quo. And I think Kanaka have an important leadership role to play. And I think that's something that we don't talk about very often in these kinds of panels. I almost feel as if, sorry if I make it a little bit uncomfortable, but I almost feel as if I'm a visitor to my own homeland sometimes. And I don't understand why that is.
I think this panel is awesome because we're doing exactly, the panel is not shying away from asking some of those uncomfortable questions. Steph beat me in the way she answered my last question, which is also not scripted. I'm sorry. So what's your message to this group here? You have some really motivated people in the audience. I'd say the entire audience is, we want to make a difference. Each one of you, if you could send us off into our normal life, whatever that is, and say, if you want to have an impact and help with water security, help with this particular topic, here is something to do. Steph, you kind of, oh, you nudged me there. And in a way, Mahina, you did too. But if you want to add to it, please do so. I like to hear, as we're closing this panel, from each one of you.
I'll jump in. Yeah, I think I just posted a poem in the chat that I wrote about climate change. And the last line is, whatever you believe, do not doubt the changes we've heard and read about, the scientific predictions of rising seas, the prophetic warnings of coming floods, all the signs we saw but refused to see. All the signs are out there. In the daily news, you can see the signs. And we, as I think Mahina said, we tend to get overwhelmed, and COVID has even made that more intense. But I think, I like to think of the pandemic as really the great unveiling. We've seen so much of what is broken, and there's two directions you can go, like you can either just go on with business as usual. There's more than two, but there's many, or there's this great resignation that's happening, and people are just kind of suffering and backing out of society, or we can double down of just say, why don't we do what we always knew we should have done in our hearts? We know the things that we want to do, even in our personal lives, because people are making these choices all the time now. I was working at a job and I didn't like it, and I'm going to stop doing that. I want to do what is important to me and resonates with my values. And I think we're in a time, it is, it's almost apocalyptic in a way. It seems like every day is normal and it's the same, but we've been given warnings of 10 years or the effects of climate change, will begin to become irreversible and will escalate. So why not do it now? And I think each in our own ways, we can dive into that. And whether it's legislation or civics is sexy, or your own personal work, or volunteering at nonprofits that you really believe in, I think it's just a wake-up call to say we need to do something different. We need to do many things differently.
Beautiful poem, Stuart. Thank you.
No.
Diane?
Yes, I agree as well. I think for me, I didn't think I had any purpose to that had anything to do with water until I actually started understanding it more. And then I felt like compelled to do something, not a lot, but something. And then I see little changes here and there after I show the film, and okay, it's making a little bit of a difference. I don't feel like I have to force anybody to make a decision, but maybe a little more education or awareness can, change even the smallest act of saving water. And to me, I feel like, oh, okay, it did make a little difference, so it was worth it. So I feel that, yes, I think everybody adapts. I think that we're all going through changes, and it's an individual decision. But once people are aware of something, like, especially today, I'm reading all the chats, I see there's a lot of people who are really wanting to do something. And I'm happy that this panel came together, because it really did serve a purpose. And so I think that's what we're all here to do, is just create the awareness and see where it leads to. And it's an individual choice.
Thank you. We are at the end of our session, and I want to wholeheartedly thank each and every one of you. For me personally, in those 4 years, this is probably the most emotional panel and the one that I will walk away from the most changed. This has been an incredibly interesting discussion. Thank you for letting me get away, not sticking to a script. And it's been an honor being here with you. I also want to thank our guests that took an hour and a half out of their day to listen. And I looked at the numbers. We didn't lose anybody, and those that we did lose actually apologized and said why. That is pretty amazing. I hope that all of you enjoyed this discussion as much as we have. I hope that this is a start of a bigger collective change, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Be well, everybody. Stay safe, and aloha.
Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Mahalo nui.
Bye.
Thank you. Aloha.
Thank you for putting